How do you rank higher on Apple and Spotify by increasing your completion rate? I think all of the things that I just said in this sentence are completely foreign to most podcasters. So I'm really excited to dive into this conversation today on part 3 of my 4-part series with Anthony. If you've tuned into the last 2 episodes, you will know and understand exactly how to get more discoverable, right? That discoverability piece, how to become more visible, so that visibility piece. And today we are talking about user engagement. This conversation was super, super powerful. Before we get into it, let me introduce my guest, just in case you don't know. Anthony is the best-selling author of the book Podcast Made Simple and the co-host of Why Your Podcast Isn't Growing. After spending 3 years working on a degree that wasn't taking him any closer to the life that he wanted to live, Anthony was determined to build a successful business in podcasting. And despite having 0 experience in business or podcasting, he dropped out of college to go all in on a business. Fast forward to today, he's now a 2-time best-selling author and has generated multiple 6 figures with a coaching business, helping podcasters grow and monetize their shows. Let's get into our conversation with Anthony. Anthony, welcome back to As It Relates to Podcasting. We are in our 3rd episode today of our 4-part series. So if you haven't caught the last 2, definitely go back and give those a listen because Anthony is sharing all of the tips that you need to elevate your show. Because what we're talking about today is user engagement, which is really cool. And also there's fundamentals in terms of discoverability and visibility that will add to your user engagement. So it kind of builds upon itself. Not to say that if you've just picked up on this episode right here, right now, that you won't gain a whole lot, but what we're talking about today is going to be even more powerful with those other 2 pieces as well. So just go check those out. So, okay, let me stop talking. Anthony, welcome back to the podcast.
So good to be here, Simona. Honestly, I'm having the best time. It's been awesome. I'm excited for this episode.
Me too. I'm so grateful that you're here. And I knew that you'd be the perfect person to talk about all of these different things because I'm telling you, I see your social media content everywhere and I absolutely love it. You are the real deal. You know exactly what you're talking about. And that is super valuable because you're giving people tangible information that they can take and they can go and implement in their lives and in their podcast. So today we are talking about user engagement and specifically how to rank higher on Apple and Spotify and increasing that completion rate. So let's first start, just in case someone listening doesn't know, what is the completion rate?
So the completion rate of your podcast, I feel like I've gone super professional there, but the completion rate of your podcast is essentially this. So every podcast episode has a completion rate. This is essentially the retention time. Out of 100 people who listen to your show, how many of them completed the episode or how far did they get in? If you have an average completion rate of, let's say, 60%, it means that, again, on average, people listen to 60% of your podcast and then they drop off. Yeah. If it's 40%, it means that they listen to an average of 40%, then they drop off. If it's 20%, it means your show isn't that great. That's what that means. However, the goal of the completion rate when it comes to podcast SEO is really important because if you think about it, Apple and Spotify, again, podcast SEO is increasing your exposure, your organic exposure on Apple and Spotify specifically. Apple and Spotify, they're pretty cheeky and they're very smart when it comes to what shows they want to recommend.
That can also lend itself to so many different things because maybe the episode was mistitled on something, you know what I mean? And then they get into the conversation and they're like, this is not at all what I anticipated we would be talking about today. And you're like, turn it off. So it's kind of
That's it.
Right? So it's important to make sure, because we were talking about the titles and all of that in the past episodes. It's important to make sure that your title is optimized for searchability and for ranking. But if it's not relevant, then you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot,
100%. I was literally about to ask you that because I think if you've clicked on a podcast episode, there was something that attracted you to click on that.
Yeah.
But you probably most likely stopped, or rather it didn't help if the episode started off really boring or it wasn't exciting, or if the hook wasn't exciting enough. You're not going to keep listening to it. You just click off, boring, next one, right? Exactly. So it's so important when it comes to user engagement and completion rate that us as podcasters, again, we sell the listen. We've attracted them with our discoverability with the right keywords and our attractive episode titles and the beautiful cover art, they've now clicked. This is your moment to shine. It's your job to sell and pitch this episode, the specific episode, to convince them and show this listener why they should stick around. To me, it feels like they failed when it came to you, Simona. They just weren't, all the standards was too high. And you're like, you know what? No, not a bit of me. But the likelihood is there was probably a disconnect between the episode title and how the show started.
And also the energy of the host and the energy of the guest. I think that those are so important. So I'll tell you a story, Anthony. I used to be a flight attendant before I got into podcasting and podcast production.
I don't know why, but I can actually see that. I can see you doing the little like
over here, back here. Oh my God. You know what's funny? So I come from a whole family of flight attendants. And when I started flying, I was like, it's kind of like the family business. You know what I mean? Because everyone in my life was a flight attendant. And I did it. And I was like, I don't know how my family did this for all these years. Like, it was a horrible job. Like, it's not a horrible job. It's just a very, like, there's a lot of really long hours. And it is just a very long, it's just its own thing. Anyways, I digress. What I want to say, the point that I want to make about this, when you're in flight attendant training, they teach you how to talk on the PA and all this stuff and, like, you know, read the welcome aboard, blah, 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 whatever airline, you know.
Still got it.
I do. Thank you. Oh my goodness. Aisles and exits need to be clear. And so, okay, what I will say though is the one thing that they taught us, and something I always remembered, especially as a podcaster, especially as a creator, even if I'm just doing voiceover stuff, like, doesn't matter. You have to smile when you talk. And it can be a little bit hard because, you know, you might be listening to this and saying, okay, well, Simona, like, yes, like, I need to smile when I talk, but that's not really how I talk. But you're still creating an experience for someone. And that is such an important piece, I think, of user engagement. I don't even know if that's one of your points to user engagement, but if it's not, you can take it as yours. You can add it to the deck.
No, you're totally right. I think really the energy is so important, right? I think we vibe off energy, we thrive off energy, and whether or not you realize it or not, having a smile on your face, it changes even your mood, your own persona, how you feel. And it's very intimate when we're talking to our listeners, when we're sharing certain content. And if we're not transferring that energy, people won't keep engaged. And again, that's part of the user engagement. But to be honest with you, to even take it back, the first starting point again was what we spoke about, which is having a hook right at the start of your podcast episode. Give someone a promise or build some intrigue around why they should listen around all the way to the end. Most podcasters, the mistakes that we've seen is they start with a jingle, they start with a massive talking about the guest in huge details. It's fun to talk about the guest, keep it concise. Or they kind of talk about their show, what they've got going on, like, you know, something that isn't really relevant again to a new listener. We need to start off the first 60 to 90 seconds essentially being a pitch fest for the podcast episode itself. The last bonus mistake that I would say, I don't know if you can give a bonus mistake, but is, you know, a common mistake that we see, like, you know, you see Stephen Bartlett, right? He does a phenomenal job with his kind of intros. They're like dopamine inducing, like really getting you hooked. So good.
They're so good.
We're not Stephen Bartlett, you know. I've seen people do trailers and don't realize that the guy's got like a team of 30 behind him. And while we should aspire to that, absolutely, it's important to know that when you do this 90-second trailer, his are crafted with such beautiful storytelling that's put in the right way, in the right sequence and order, that it captures you in. What most podcasters do wrong that we find is the trailer just goes on for way too long, provides way too much context. There's no intrigue. It's just this clip that's been put at the start, but doesn't leave you at a cliffhanger wanting to learn more. They kind of just give away the secrets at the start, or it's just not relevant to the title. Like, I've literally listened to a trailer for at the start of an episode and thought to myself, like, what the hell does this have to do with the title of the show? You know, like, this isn't correlation. So then again, I do a Simona, I just skip, board, next one, you know? So that's super important. The first 90 seconds has to sell the listen with a massive hook and a benefit of what people will gain from listening to the show.
I love that. Okay, so question for you about that. would you then suggest that people take a clip from their episode, put at the beginning before your musical intro starts, and
Mm,
then go into the content? Because I don't actually do that on any of my podcasts, but I have clients that do.
mm,
And the one thing though that I always make sure to do is I'll open up the podcast with a hook
mm.
of some kind. So even though I'm
That's
not
it.
doing it right at the beginning, I still do it
Mm.
within the podcast itself. But that said, I can easily change it.
So I guess the question was, did the trailer at the start, do I think it's worth having a trailer or
Mm-hmm.
having the hook? I would
Mm-hmm.
say for most podcasters, it's better off just having our format actually is kind of like a hook. So we'll call it an initial hook, which
Mm-hmm.
is kind of like, do you want to discover a new way, an untapped secret of
Mm.
increasing your podcast completion rate? That'll
So
be the
something that's
hook.
not even part of the podcast, like something that you're recording separately.
Yes, you can actually record it at the end of the. So
Ah,
you can record it and then insert it at the end. Sorry,
love that.
in post production,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So that'll be the initial hook. The second phase is kind of like introducing the show. Hello, my name is Anthony Nwaneri, or my name is Simona, blah, blah. And that's the kind of repeated intro. That really should be around 30 seconds, nothing more, nothing less. Again, tell people what the show is
Yeah,
about, etc. The
yeah.
final piece is what we call and encourage our clients to do is um 3 open loop hooks. I'll
Mm-hmm.
say it again.
I like that.
3 open loop hooks. Sounds sexy, sounds a bit confusing at the same time, sounds sophisticated. I promise you, is dead straightforward. Essentially, what you want to do is open a loop, i.e., build intrigue. An example could be something along the lines of, I'll give you one when it came to the podcast, just a random example. Let's say, for example, it was a podcast about, pitching or whatever.
Yeah.
A 3 open loop hook would be, in this episode, you'll discover how to analyze your most popular episodes to uncover topics that are capturing your audience's attention.
Yeah.
3 creative ways to repurpose these episodes successfully, and whether or not you should use your analytics to potentially pivot or niche down your podcast to be more targeted when it comes to your content strategy. Those
Love
are
that.
again 3 open loop hooks. That has nothing to do with this podcast episode, just an
No,
example.
but I'm also
But
that episode. I'm like, where is it?
but again, you see, and at
Uh-huh.
each point with the initial hook, the goal is to grab someone's attention and say you're in the right place. The intro is to introduce what the show is, who you are, etc. Keep that short and concise. And then the open loop hook is essentially to show them the benefit they're going to gain, build
Mm.
massive intrigue, and build curiosity, because humans have to close loops. We like a
Yes.
beginning and an end. So to them, it's like keeps them listening all the way to the end to get that golden nugget they came in for in the first place.
Love that. I love that. I think that's absolutely genius. And so all of these things, just for our listener right now, like all of these things add up to your overall user engagement. And so after that structure, so you have your hook in the beginning, your musical jingle, intro, whatever. You have your 3 open loop questions.
Loop hook, that's it.
Yeah. And then after that, then what? Then you're just going into the guest content. I'm going to say that I would love if in 2024, in this new year that we're in, if people would stop asking their guests, tell me about you as the
Yeah.
first question. Like, can we leave it? I honestly, I get it and I get why people ask it, but I just feel like there has to be something stronger that starts. And I'll give you an example. On Happiness Happens, which is my other podcast, I open every single conversation with, what does happiness mean to you? And then I'm going to get into their story. I'm going to get into who they are. I'm going to get into the journey that brought them there. But like when you ask someone, tell me about you, people are like, oh, well, I don't really know. What is there to know about me? Well, I was born in 1999 and I did this and that. You know what I mean? And it's like, that's not relevant. And you've just wasted the first 10 minutes of your podcast talking about something that people are not even interested in.
There
That's
we
my
go.
thought.
And again, you're not selling the listen,
No.
right? You're not convincing someone to stick around, because people come in for the title. Like, we're inherently selfish creatures a lot of the times. If we don't know a guest, if you're listening to this right now and we saw Anthony Nwaneri and you didn't know who I was, that doesn't mean anything at all to you. But when we
Right.
attach other values, podcast SEO, how to increase your discoverability, how to get more organic exposure, these are buzzwords that you then associate with my name. But when we have a podcast episode, like Simona just pointed out, we can start the question off with who are you, your backstory. But for us anyway, I feel like it's important to have a pattern interrupt, right?
Yes.
What people aren't used to, because when you're just in your normal cadence, that's when your brain switches off. But if you listen to a podcast and that's the first question you ask, you're like, that's different. I need to pay attention. Right? And that feeds in again to someone listening all the way to the end, because it feels like something new and different that I've not heard before.
I love that.
And then I guess once you've gone through the intro part, honestly, the most of it is now thinking about the pacing of the show. And it's also thinking about, like, am I always looping back to the actual episode title, to the goal of the show? Right? Tangents are good, but it's okay to read it back in. For example, me and Simone, we riff, we talk about different things. We might, have like some segues, but we quickly always recenter it and try to anyway.
Exactly.
Back to keep ourselves back on track. And that's what I think is really, really important. Again, having a clear promise of your title, convincing someone to stick around with your hook, open loop hook, etc. And then as you go through the podcast episode, looping back round and gaining a sense of direction in terms of the conversation, in terms of fulfilling that promise, in terms of closing those open loop hooks as the episodes goes along.
Love that. Would you suggest a creator title their episode before even recording it?
Oh, that's a great question. You can, I'll say no. I don't. I personally don't title the episodes before. I title them afterwards most of the time. Sometimes I do, but most of the time I'll title them after, because you don't know what's going to come out in an episode. There might be some juicy piece like, oh my God, I've really impressed myself there. How the hell did I come out with that? or you realize that the episode title came up before was completely irrelevant to the topic that you eventually explored, right? So it's really important to really find the best to record the content first. Either if you're interviewing someone, record the content first and then build out something that's going to be intriguing and a promise your episode delivers on. That's what I would say, because you don't know what's going to come out of an interview, right?
No, exactly. And like, how would you ever be able to capture like the essence of a conversation that you've never had? You know what I mean? Like, it's really, it's hard. It's really hard. And so like, I think I tell this to my clients all the time. Have an intention for the conversation that you're going to have, know where you're going. And this is, again, something I do all the time with Happiness Happens. So on that show, it's more of like it's more of a self-help podcast, but what I'm doing is interviewing people to understand what happiness means to them and how it's showed up in their life every single day, and like how they've created more of it, how they access it, and so on, so on. And I mean, when I say so on, so on, it doesn't make it sound that interesting, but honestly, it's a really good podcast. Anyways, so I always say when I'm recording for that podcast, I have all kinds of different people that will come on. I have entrepreneurs that will come on, trauma specialists, psychologists, therapists, doctors, spiritual healers, like through and through. I know exactly what I want to get out of that conversation. Like, I know exactly the intention of the conversation. So knowing the intention of the conversation you're going to have is super important. And then I try, exactly like you said, that pattern interrupt in the beginning. And then I kind of structure it like this. So, I ask that question, what does happiness mean to you? You're going to tell me what happiness means to you, but you're going to tell me in the way that it means to you. And that's actually going to relate to all of your experience and all of the things that we're going to talk about anyways. You know what I mean? Because that's what you're already an expert in anyways. And then from there, you're still tapping into the intention of the show and the message of the person that is sitting in front of you, but you're doing it in a different way. And I think we live in such an age now where there's so much content. Everyone is a creator, everyone has content out there. How does yours stand out? How does yours get seen? And I think that's the key.
I love that. That was,
Thanks.
yeah. You know what? Got nothing to say. That was awesome.
Perfect.
I completely agree.
I love that. Anthony, is there anything else that you would share with our audience today when we think about ranking higher? Like, what are you looking at in terms of ranking? Are you looking at something like Chartable? Where are you looking? How are you reading the charts?
Yeah, so honestly, we don't really pay too much attention to the charts specifically. For us, again, it's really about how do we rank high on Apple and Spotify. So we look at Apple and Spotify and see where we rank for specific keywords. If your podcast is about content creation, then type in content creation and then just see where you ranked. Are you on page 1, page 2, or are you not ranking at all? Right. But when it comes to specifically user engagement, and I think there's a fourth piece, which is building relevancy, which is a bit more intentional and strategic.
Yep.
But when it comes to user engagement specifically, is really those main components. Thinking about completion rate, how do I increase it now? Don't get disheartened if you recognize that, if you see and spot, oh my God, like people really are dropping off at 20%. Like that must mean my podcast maybe is not good, or 40% or 60%. No, that's completely okay. It doesn't mean the content itself isn't necessarily good. It just means maybe you need to just have a stronger hook
Yeah.
and an incentive-based open loop hook at the start of the episode. We've had clients go from a retention time consistently of 40% to 80% literally by changing the first 90 seconds of how they pitch the podcast episode. So don't get
Wow.
disheartened by it when you look at the numbers. And you can go to Apple Podcast Connects or
Mm-hmm.
Spotify Analytics for podcasters to find out what your retention time is when in regards to kind of user engagement and podcast SEO.
Amazing. I love that. Thank you so much, Anthony, for joining me on today's podcast episode. I love this conversation, and I think
No,
it
it's
was
been
really
awesome. It's been
valuable.
great.
Right? I think so too.
100%.
I agree. And so I will see you on our next episode, the last one of our 4-part series that talks about building relevancy and how to dominate search. So if you're listening to today's episode, be sure to hit that subscribe button because you are going to want to follow along as we continue on this 4-part series here today. So thank you, Anthony. You can't tell me that that was not a powerful conversation. Anthony is such a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the SEO and podcasting world. And he left so many tangible tips in this conversation that I know you can take and implement right away to your own podcast, to your own show, and to your own process. All of Anthony's links can be found in the show notes below, as well as my links. So be sure to connect with both of us. Let us know what you love from our conversation. Say hello. We cannot wait to hear from you. I will see you on the next one.